Hi everybody, Frank Finance here. Hope you're having a wonderful day. Today we're going to be talking about Amazon, ticker symbol AMZN, purchasing MGM Studios and what that means. The deal was reported on May 25th and has been pretty well reported, but just as a highlight, Amazon is going to be acquiring MGM Studios for $8.45 billion. Now, in addition to that, I really want to talk about what this actually means for Amazon and why Amazon is particularly focused on MGM Studios. Now, a lot of people think it's about streaming. It's all about streaming. Well, I have a little bit of a contrarian. I do think it's related to streaming, but that's not the sole focus here. The sole focus is really on IP. Now, MGM has decent amount of old films that they still have access to. And before I go into what content they have in the works and what they currently own that's historical, let's look at this quote by one of their leaders at Amazon. The real financial value behind this deal is the treasure trove of IP. So right off the bat, they're telling you this is about the IP. It's not about adding it, it's the existing content to Amazon Prime Video. It's really about them adding IP so they can enhance that and create new content based on the IP that's sitting there. So to continue that catalog, we plan to reimagine and develop together with MGM's talent team. It's very exciting and provides so many opportunities for high quality storytelling. So that last sentence just proves what I said, is they're not necessarily worried about the historical and what they have access to. They have bought stories so they can remake, they can add to. It's kind of like what Disney did with Star Wars, is they're packing on additional stories around a brand, right? So they take those brands and then they can bolt on different storylines. So let's take a look at some of the planned content. So in the film side, for this year, they got releases all the way through the end of the year. Some of the big names here, they have a Respect, that's an Aretha Franklin, I believe. The Addams Family sequel, there's a James Bond, No Time to Die. G.I. Joe, that's pretty awesome. And I honestly don't know these other releases. So moving on to television, I think the two biggest ones here is The Handmaid's Tale Season 4 and a new season of Vikings Valhalla Season 1 for Netflix. Now, I'm curious specifically on these if the studio is going to continue working with the other networks/platforms, or those eventually will move to Prime. I'm curious as to how those things transition from one network to another, or if they'll continue, or if they'll just dissolve the relationship completely. I'm curious as to who owns the right of the story versus the publishing platform. So that'll be interesting to know. Now let's look at some of the notable names that MGM has. So again, in terms of historical, they have about 4,000 older movies. Again, I don't think that's what they're necessarily worried about adding to Prime. They're mostly worried about they can make remakes of some of the biggest, some huge movies. So they got Rocky, RoboCop, Pink Panther, Silence of the Lambs, Legally Blonde, Moonstruck, Basic Instinct, Tomb Raider. These are some big names, big movies in the past, and definitely huge potential for remakes. Now, you might have saw I skipped over James Bond, and that's a special. It's probably the biggest one on the list here. But it's a little bit special. And the reason why I say that is James Bond is 50-50 ownership between MGM and, I believe, let's see, I don't remember the name of the family, but essentially that family owns 50% of the rights, and they also have the creative rights as well. So there's a little bit of a limitation on what they can do and bolting on different stories to James Bond. And it seems to have been working out for the franchise in the past, so they may not want to touch that, but we'll be interested in seeing what happens with the James Bond franchise specifically. So as you saw on here, there's a lot of content that's available coming up in both film as well as streaming. or sorry, I should say television series, as well as some of their old, there's names that Amazon is acquiring. So let's go ahead and take a look at MGM's financials and see what that means for, at least from a pure fundamentals side, on what exactly is Amazon acquiring from a financial perspective. Please like this video if you haven't already. Thanks for watching. Back to the content. All right, jumping right into revenue that MGM had in 2020 and 2019. So we look on the revenue side, total revenue for 2020 was $1.4 million, and it was $1.5 million, roughly the same. So it's about a $50,000 difference here between 2019 and 2020. That's relatively good. It is a studio, so they did fairly good on their revenue side. They had a slight drop in film, a little drop in basically 4%, 2%, and 3%, with a total of 3% drop in revenue between 2019 and 2020. That's fairly good, since most of these media companies did fairly poorly, unless you're a streaming service, and MGM is definitely not a streaming service. Looking on, I think the thing that you really want to pay attention to is this operating income. In 2019, they had an impairment that actually turned their operating income negative for that year. So it took them to negative $448 million. In the previous year, they had $120 million in operating income, and their net income was $33 million. All right, if we go to page 34 of their FY 2020 financial report, you can see that their corporate debt is at $1.9 billion, and then if you look at total of all the program rights, creative talent, and lease obligations, that puts them at about $2.6 billion in total debt, rights, lease obligations, etc. Now let me look at two multiples. If we do the price of their EBITDA in 2020, it was 27 times. So that 8.5, they paid 27 times their 2020 EBITDA to be that $8.5 billion that they paid. Now if we look at price to operating income, they paid 70 times operating income of 2020. So those multiples I just showed you are fairly high in my opinion. But let's talk about what wasn't included in 2020 numbers that is important to know. So if we look at James Bond, which is what other people are talking about, the biggest name inside of MGM Studios. Let's look at some of the last releases, the ones that Daniel Craig was in. Now, if you look at their in one column, we'll go up here. You got the box office actuals, adjusted, and then the budget actuals here. So if we go down here, we look at the amount of revenue that Casino Royale, the first Daniel Craig movie, brought in $594 million. They spent $150 million on that. So there you go, an extra $400 million. That would be an extra $400 million to the net income, roughly to the net income or operating income at a minimum for Casino Royale, and that's pretty great. You saw their 2020 numbers were 1.4 for the revenue side, so adding $400 million to that is a big impact, and also affects the multiple that we talked about earlier. Looking at Quantum of Solace, $586 million, $200 million, so it adds $386 million to that year, right? If, let's say, James Bond was being added to that year. So 2012, they had Skyfall came out, $1.1 billion, so huge increase in revenue there for that movie. And you saw that they had, actually I looked this up, they had $200 million budget for that movie, so they grossed over, they had $900 million that could potentially have been added to their operating income, and that's huge. It's 80-90% of what they made total revenue for 2020, and definitely improves those multiples quite substantially. So if they're buying it in a year which James Bond movie is going to be released, it's probably going to increase the amount of money that they have to pay for it. So again, you can see that No Time to Die is being released later this year, and you can see that The estimate that'll be about $250 million. Let's say it averages, let's say it just goes along the lowest two movies. That'll add roughly $250 million. If that's really a worst case scenario, $250 million to that operating income will definitely improve that multiple set substantially from 70 to around, I think, maybe 20. So yeah, I mean, it definitely improves those multiples. The only thing I'm worried about here, actually curious about, is if Amazon is going to say, hey, there's money to be made here. We need to increase the frequency in which James Bond movies are created, or start rolling up some slap-ons. So make a Q movie, or make something about different agents, or who knows what they plan to do with this, or if they even have the ability to make those series in addition to the James Bond film collection. So that's very interesting. We'll see what they do. As a reminder, I think this whole thing is definitely about the IP and not about the movies. So Amazon's making a big move here. I think it's really great that they're going out and they're purchasing some big names that have large followings, and they hopefully can create content that's going to add on and not detract from the original. So I'm super excited about this. I think it gives them a nice little competitive with some of the bigger names. I know Amazon Prime is not necessarily about streaming. In general, I don't think they buy Amazon Prime for the video. And so I think in some context, at least I think in some future, there could be this breakaway from Prime that you pay for shipping and other services, and breaking off the Prime Video and turn that into a pure streaming play. And I think this is one step in that process for them to get the legs that they need to make it a standalone business. So we'll see. That's just speculation at this point. So don't take that word for it, but that's just what I see them posturing at right now, and seeing what they can do to get themselves a leg up in the future. So hopefully you enjoy this video. Thanks for watching. Frank Finance, out.